Today on Virginia Legends podcast, I'm going to talk Martinsville area basketball with Michael Barrows. Michael was a member of the 1966 state championship team, played with the legendary Husky Hall. He played college basketball at Maryville in Tennessee, Division III basketball. He coached Drewry Mason in Ridgeway, Virginia, in the mid 70s. He was a graduate assistant for the great Terry Holland at UVA. Seems to know a lot about Martinsville basketball, and which is a fascinating area to me. My dad being from Bedford. Michael, again, thanks for doing this. Great to meet you.
You bet.
Yeah. Well, Michael, first I wanted to ask you, why is Martinsville so special? Why is this little area in Virginia? They've had so many state championships at Martinsville High, but also at
Yeah.
the schools, George Washington Carver and Drewry Mason, other schools around there. I'm not sure if football is great in that area. I know Nikki Fisher is from Martinsville, but why is Martinsville such a great basketball hotbed?
Well, Julian, I really think it begins with Mel Cartwright Sr. in the mid 1950s. And Mel Cartwright Sr. really established Martinsville's basketball program and won the first state championship in 1958. Right. Coming on the heels of that, Martinsville built for the time, a really magnificent new gymnasium, which hosted district tournaments through much of the 1960s. And of course, there started in 1961 a streak of championships and near championships. In 1961, Mickey Haynes for Martinsville hit a jump shot in the old War Memorial Gym at Blacksburg and went to win the 1961 1B state championship, beating Buena Vista, which was coached by Gene Mahaffey, who would later go on he was an assistant at Virginia for a while. He was the head coach at Carson Newman, and then won a NCAA Division III at Ohio Wesleyan. I think that was in 1980. So anyway, in 62, Martinsville finished third. And that was the year we lost to Pulaski in the semifinals. That was coached by Carl Tacey, who would later go on to coach Ferrum and then Marshall, I think, and then on to Wake Forest, doing quite a bit of success there in the 1970s with players like Skip Brown. In 1963, we played James Monroe of Fredericksburg in the state finals, and we lost. So we finished second that year. One of the stories about Coach Mel Cartwright was that on returning back to Martinsville after that loss, that in Roanoke, he stopped the bus on the bridge and threw the the second place trophy into the river.
See, I always heard a Husky Hall had done that before. That was a story that I heard, but it was Cartwright who had done it.
Well, through that era, Husky and Mel kind of traded back and forth who was officially the head coach. But as players, we knew that if one told us, we never stopped to think, oh, he's the head coach this year and not the head coach. This was if one of them told you to do something, you knew to do it.
Yeah. Well, who was Mel Cartwright? Where did he come from? Where did he learn his basketball?
I don't know a lot about his background before the 1950s, but Mel Sr. was very much responsible not only for starting the program, but also as being the dad of two of Martinsville's finest players in that era. Mel Cartwright Sr. was the leading force, along with Steve Saunders, on our 1966 state championship team. That was a team that was sometimes referred to as not Martinsville, but Mumpsville. Halfway through the season, everybody in the locker room who had not had the mumps got the mumps. And we were going to places like EC Glass and George Washington and Danville, starting kids up off the JV. And we went into the district tournament needing to win the state championship to have a winning record. And as long as anybody could remember in that era, Martinsville had never had a losing season. So we managed to beat Bassett in the district finals, the Piedmont District finals, and then went on and beat Lee of Stanton, which is certainly a power in Virginia basketball. We beat Lee of Stanton at Cassell up in Blacksburg. That place remains one of my favorite basketball arenas of all time.
Yeah. Well, I'm a UVA guy, so I don't feel the same way, Michael. But what about Husky Hall? I mean, for those who don't know, Husky Hall is one of the winningest coaches in state history, if not wins, definitely titles. Was in Martinsville many, many years. I started following the game in the late 70s. He was there. And I think he coached into the 90s. And I think as Troy Wells, his assistant, took over there. But was Husky from Martinsville, and had he played for Cartwright?
Husky grew up down in Fieldale, which is just outside of Martinsville. For a while, we were playing against the old Fieldale High School, which was really very small. And being an alum of that school, Husky would never let us run up the score on Fieldale. He'd always substitute early and often to keep a little bit of control. He played collegiately, Husky played at Elon, along with Ben Kendall, who was the basketball coach at George Washington and Danville. And that was quite a rivalry between Martinsville and Danville in that era. Part of what Husky always wanted to do was have us play against the very best competition that he could find. And this included I know my junior year, the year we won the state championship, we played Patrick Henry of Roanoke, who would finish second in the 1A classification that year.
Yeah. So, I'm not that familiar with Martinsville. I'm not sure if I've ever been there. I've been to Danville numerous times, going through on 29, but also going to tournaments and stuff. I told you my father was from Bedford, and he's got family in Christiansburg and Bluefield, that part of the state. Is Martinsville, Danville, Patrick County, Franklin County, Lynchburg, Roanoke, are these all similar demographics, similar areas? Are they very unique and different in the demographics and the people?
Well, I don't know if it's demographics, Julian, as much as it is economics. And of course, that whole area has been hit pretty hard in the last couple decades as the tobacco industry has declined, and the textile and furniture business that made Martinsville one of the most prosperous areas of the state back in the 1960s. And of course, that's completely flipped now. And they continue to face challenges economically. So there were two things that kind of point to me Martinsville's commitment to basketball. In the basketball program in Martinsville, we were expected to be down in the city park on Tuesdays and Thursday nights during the summer. This was not optional. This was the summer program. And we went down there one night. This was, I think, 1965. And all the kids from the African-American community in Martinsville had shown up, and they were playing on the city park. This was the first area to be integrated. And Husky told us, and this was, of course, in the era when segregation was not only the law, but very strong in the culture. And Husky said, we're going to keep going to the park. And he said, these guys will make you better players. So there was really a commitment from Mel Cartwright and from Husky to find the very best competition that we could. And any racial matters were really secondary.
I noticed in the 70s and 80s when I'd watch Huskies teams, he let his teams play. He didn't really try to take control of his athletes. He let them express themselves. He seemed very comfortable in coaching other athletes. When did you first start having black friends playing with black players? Nikki told me Fisher when I interviewed him that he felt
Mhm.
Martinsville was still very segregated by the time he moved there. I think his parents lived right there there's a river or there's a middle of town where the town was kind of segregated geographically,
Mhm.
and he lived right in the middle of it. But when did you start having black friends, and when it become okay for black and white kids to be friends?
Well, as I was saying, the culture was really pervasive in that we did play some with the in the park with the kids from the Fayette Street area of Martinsville,
Mhm.
and got to know them a little bit. But afterwards, we pretty much would go out to our hangouts, and they would go to theirs. It really wasn't until I got to Maryville College that I, really was in a social situation where it was comfortable to to hang out with the with kids other than from my race.
Yeah. What was the black high school in Martinsville? What was it called?
That was Albert Harris High School.
Albert.
And Albert Harris had been one of these schools that was built in the 1950s as the Virginia State Legislature came to the realization that the separate but equal school system, although officially broken down by the Brown decision in 1954, that to do an end run around that, they began to put more money into the facilities for the African American schools across the state. And the Albert Harris building was one of that. I think they still use that as an elementary school.
It's interesting you say that. It's right on point. You probably consider Fairfax County progressive. That's where I grew up. They built the black high school in Fairfax County in 1954, right after the Brown versus Board decision by Brown versus Board decision, and they didn't integrate the schools until 1965. Even though there were some black schools that started to trickle in a little bit earlier than that. Some had sued to
Mhm.
get in, or some felt comfortable enough to get in. But in Fairfax County, it was the last county to have a high school for black students in the northern part of the state. Fairfax County and Front Royal. It's really kind of a shameful. My aunt who lived in Oakton took the bus to Manassas every day to go to high school. It was an hour bus ride, and the
Yeah.
bus snaked all the way through the county, which is a big county. And then when they opened Luther Jackson, which is the school, she ended up going to Luther Jackson, and she never did go to student school with white kids. I think she graduated in 1960. But anyway, so when Albert Harris was the school, Michael, when did it close for high school, and when did they integrate Martinsville?
We had the first African American student come. This was in the fall of 1963, I believe.
Wow, it's early.
Had about 1,000 kids in the school, grades 8 through 12, and Michael Muse was the only African American kid in the whole school, and he faced a lot of very unfortunate situations under the Virginia Freedom of Choice uh, banner. There were additional African American students that came to Martinsville while I was in high school in the mid '60s. Probably one of the first basketball players of note was Al Carter, who played at Martinsville in '69 and '70, I guess, and then played at Winston-Salem State, I believe.
Parents' Big House Gaines, right?
Or Big House, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever happened to Michael Muse? I think that was his name. Whatever happened to him? Did he?
His, I don't know for sure.
Mm.
His dad was the head of the NAACP in
Wow,
Martinsville.
that's a lot of pressure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, he saw great kid. And I'm sure that his success in his adult life is a testament to that.
Yeah, well, that's great. I like to look him up sometime. So did you play against? So there were no black players on the Martinsville team that won the state championship?
That's correct. We did not have any black kids on the team. I think we only played against one. there was an African-American kid from Covington that we played in the state semifinals. And also at Tech in Blacksburg.
It is interesting because if you look at I had all the state programs, and you begin to see Black kids sprinkled in, even like in Warwick High School in Hampton, Newport News in '64. I think Wakefield and Washington, Lee, and Arlington had Black kids, and I think the state program '64, '63. So they were coming, but by '68 and '69 there was a complete transition. So you did not play against Black players at all until you played against Covington. It was all white players that you played against.
Yeah, in the official games, and like I said, for a couple of years we'd been down in the park with the where the African American kids came. The thing we didn't understand is that it was not just a basketball game; it was a whole social scene for those kids. Their girlfriends would come down and watch them play, and we'd go like, "Where are our girlfriends? Why don't they come cheer for us?"
They didn't care enough about you to come watch you play. So did you didn't play against any of the teams? When did the Martinsville area teams begin to integrate? Were they all about the same time? It was like with I guess GW Carver. That was probably a Black school though. But did all the schools?
Oh yeah,
did all the schools begin to integrate about the same time?
Yeah, this was 70, 71, somewhere along in there. I went to Drewry Mason as the head coach in 1973 and was there for 2 years. We won the Piedmont District regular season, my first season. And that was just the beginning of where they had completely collapsed both school systems into a single one. As you can imagine, at Drewry Mason, they were really running two schools under one roof. The African-American kids stayed to themselves. The white kids mostly stayed to themselves. In some ways, the only place they really met was on the basketball court. So there were those attendant challenges from the point of view, in addition to the fact that we were playing in a very competitive district at the time. Howard West teams down at Tunstall, Dan River. Of course, Martinsville was still being coached by Husky at that point. George Washington Carver had a player named Talmadge Tanks who would go on and play at Drake, I believe. Not sure if he played football or basketball, but he did. I think he did go to Drake. So a lot of good athletes. Talmadge Tanks also, I think, was taken in the pro baseball draft along about 1975 or so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, was it different?
There's one other thing I wanted to mention. You were limited to a certain number of scrimmages during that era. I don't know what the rules are now, but Husky used to sneak us over to Albert Harris.
I was going to ask you that.
And we would scrimmage against them and told them not to say anything about it.
Yeah. There were some famous scrimmages up here, the same with Luther Jackson and some of the other schools, in a school called Parker Gray, which was the Black school out in the city of Alexandria. And they had athletes, and they were so much better than the white schools at the time. But when the old timers on our group, we have that Facebook group, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we beat them in a scrimmage." And I'm like, "Yeah, you guys beat those guys in a scrimmage." I I believe. Michael, was the tension in town the same as the tension in the country where Fielddale was, or Drewry Mason? Was it the same everywhere, or was it a little bit different in town?
I don't think in Martinsville and Henry County, I don't think the racial tension was as bad as it was in some other places like Danville, which was only 30 miles to the east. But the hundreds of years of culture and law don't go away easily. And I remember the first year I was back teaching school, I was an assistant coach at Fielddale Collinsville, and Bill Vaya, who was one of the other teachers in the state, in the county, who happened to be African American, asked me to play on the Martinsville Flyers team in the Industrial League, and so I was the one Caucasian guy on the team. But these were guys I'd played against down in the park. I didn't think anything unusual. And in fact, I was glad. It was a great group of guys to play with. And we won the city championship, did pretty well in a regional tournament. And so you had asked earlier, when did I first have the opportunity to hang out and befriend some of the African American community in Martinsville? And that certainly would be one of them.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about how the tensions can change throughout the state. My father told me stories. He was 1933 in Bedford. And so he grew up.
Wow.
The older guys were the 29th Infantry guys. He knew those guys.
I was going to ask if your dad was involved in the Normandy invasion, because that was. I don't believe
there were any African American units that were involved. I don't think. My father, so he knew those kids, and in Bedford, the racial tensions weren't bad. He said the white kids and the black kids, families got along. Now, as you know, the black people had to know their place, but there wasn't the tensions that my dad said that he saw in Lynchburg and Roanoke. Bedford was not like that. They had friends with the white boys in town. They played games, baseball together. So it did, and so he didn't. But they also, as they got older, the friendships did not remain. They kind of, when they got past like 15 or 16, they weren't allowed to hang out. Now, my father was in the Korean War. He did a combat tour, Korea in '53, and they did 2 combat tours in Vietnam. His brother did a combat tour in Vietnam as well. So he's military. But yeah, he was too young to have been in. And I don't think the Army was integrated until Truman, and I don't think they had any black units in the Normandy invasion. Anyway, I don't think. But
it's interesting. I never really knew the history of that until well after high school.
Yeah,
that history about what the Bedford boys did on December 6th, 1944. But they started a new high school in Bedford in the mid '60s called Liberty. I never put the two events together, but obviously that was an honor for the people who had fought on the beaches at Omaha.
Yeah. So my grandfather was the principal of the black school in Bedford called Bedford Training School. My father's father. So he was a minister as well. He died relatively young, so we stopped going to Bedford. So I didn't get steeped in the history. I got relatives in Farmville and Pamplin as well, but I did get to know Christiansburg better because my father's brother had a church there, so I'd go there a little bit. But I've always been fascinated by the history of that part of the state, because you have your Appalachia, you have your foothills, but you have as you were saying, you have your industry there as well. You have your car racing culture in Martinsville.
Oh, yeah.
It's a fascinating area. Lots of tension, lots of civil rights history there. Especially Danville. And my mother and dad, on their wedding day, they were in a sit-in just for fun. They went to a sit-in and sat in the cafe and got kicked out. Yeah, it was a fascinating time. I sometimes worry that we're going back to those times, and I hope not. But I don't want to offend too many people on this podcast. So we're going to get back to basketball. So look, one of the things that fascinated about you right away is you knew something about this Hardin Reynolds team.
Yeah.
And I collect these programs, and I was looking at the picture of this team, and they won the state championship in '68 and '69, and I believe they had just been integrated those years. And I think the school closed a couple of years later, and they consolidated into another school. So it was kind of short-lived school. But that picture, white kids and black kids, and they had their arms around each other. It's a fascinating photo for that time. When you really think about what was going on in the world, that photo is fascinating because you were just 2 years older than these kids, and you had no black players on your team, and this is only 20 miles or less away from you. So tell us a little bit about Hardin Reynolds, what you know about that team in that area.
Well, I think there were several small high schools out in Patrick County, and the reason I saw Hardin Reynolds play is I did some sports reporting for the Martinsville Bulletin when I was in high school, And so I came home from college at the end of 1967 and early 1968, Christmas break. And the Bulletin sent me up to Kreitz to cover Hardin Reynolds for a couple games. So I saw Jesse and Samson Reynolds, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, these guys really know how to play and had great athletic ability.
Wow. And you probably had no sense of what the tension was like. I mean, they integrated a little bit earlier than some of the parts of your area, right? So do you have any sense of what the dynamic on those teams, or all you knew they were good basketball players?
Yeah, it was hard to get a sense of what the dynamic was in that environment. I would expect that the African American players, in that role, were much more embraced by the community. Were more isolated from any of the racial bias because they were, supporting the community and helping the basketball team.
That's more in the hills and the mountains, right? That's probably more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are those probably miners kids, or what would you think in Patrick County?
I don't know if there's much mining up in that area. I think it's more agricultural. And it's right by the Blue Ridge Parkway, Mabry's Mill, that area. And of course they had a lot of moonshining up there as well.
Yeah, that's the whole mountain ridge on the state. So yeah. So let's quickly, we didn't give you a chance to talk a little bit more about your state title run. How important was that to you to win a state championship? I assume that was your senior year. That must have been a very special.
Well, that was my junior year.
And
okay. The setting for it was, of course, in 61, Martinsville won the state championship. In 62, we were third. In 63, we were runner-up to James Monroe of Fredericksburg. And in 64, we won the state championship, beating Stafford High School. In 1965, we got upset in the district tournament by Bassett, led by L.J. Kilby. And I think that was the first district game that Martinsville had lost in like 4 or 5 years. And so going into the 66 season, boy, there was a lot of pressure to get back to that top tier. And of course, when everyone in the locker room who had not had the mumps caught them, fortunately, I had them as a child, but that put us in the position where we're coming through February and the district tournaments. We had to win out in order to get a winning season, and of course, another state championship. So we were quite fortunate, because you always need a little bit of luck in those endeavors.
Yeah. Well, and was it memorable to you? I mean, did it mean anything to your life? Was your life any different because you won a state championship?
Well, I think anytime you have been part of excellence, it shows you what that's like, and I think you strive to repeat that in your adult life, whether it's in your professional career, whether it's in your personal relationships. Having the experience of that type of excellence meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to the other players in Martinsville. We took a great deal of pride and put in a lot of hard work. One of the things Husky always focused on, we ran 2-a-day practices at Martinsville over Christmas vacation. We'd go in the morning and then, an hour or so off for lunch and come back and work out in the afternoon. I loved it. Not all the guys did, but we were in there. There were weighted vests that we wore on wind sprints. We actually had some of the old blue tip Converse high top shoes. That the blue tip represented a little bit of weight that was built into the shoe, and so we wore those every day in practice. Excuse me. we wore the weighted Converse every day in practice except the day before the games. And then we had the regular shoes that we wore for the games and for the one day of practice before a game. And that went on all season. So there was a lot of conditioning. I mentioned about the summer program, and there was just a lot of pride. It helped, I think, that the program was very well funded, Martinsville being a very prosperous community at that time. So there were a lot of little things, the way we traveled, the money that was spent on food and that type of thing, really spoke to a first-class program.
Yeah. Well, Husky Hall sounds like an inspirational guy. He definitely made his kids tough, made them work. Was he a tactician? Was he an innovator as a coach as well?
Yes, he was. And again, I think a lot of this was in the training methods. I mentioned about the weighted shoes. Mm-hmm. The other thing we did on the side baskets at Martinsville, a number of them had smaller hoops on them. They were inserts over the standard basketball hoop.
That's interesting.
So if you didn't arch the ball correctly, if you didn't hit that thing dead center, so it did work on improving your shot.
That's very interesting. So what happened your senior year? You guys weren't able to get back to the States?
We won the district championship my senior year. Mm-hmm. And we had an unfortunate draw in the first round. We played Blacksburg with Rick Idlet. Rick was a year behind me, but even as a junior, he was already all times land and just really a very good basketball player. Rick would go on and start for Frank McGuire's South Carolina team that won the ACC in 1971, along with John Roach, Kevin Joyce, John Rybach, and Tom Owens.
Yeah, there's a guy that's putting up videos, New River guy. I can't think of his name. I posted some on the Facebook group. He's got all these Radford games, all the teams from up there. I bet you I can pull up a video of that team. I know I saw a 68 video from Radford. Radford. So look, you end up going to Marysville, Tennessee. Tell us about
Maryville, singular Maryville.
I'm sorry, Maryville. Tell us about Maryville and your times there.
Well, at the time, this was in the pre-Division III years, and so we were playing schools like UNC Asheville, UT Chattanooga. We were pretty much a Division III playing it was called college division then, but it would equate to the Division II now. And the thing I look back on at my career at Maryville was I think I helped establish a culture of winning there. They have become a very successful Division III program, and my friends Randy Lambert was their longtime coach and went to many NCAA tournaments, and Raul Placeres is now the coach there, and just missed the NCAA tournament this year, losing in their conference championship game after he had one of his top players hurt. So my little shout out there to Maryville Scots, and hopefully next year they'll be in the big dance for Division III.
Yeah. So you were there when RFK was assassinated and Martin Luther King was assassinated, right? So that was
Yes.
That was a very turbulent time. Also, wasn't the shadow of getting drafted to Vietnam with you? So tell us a little bit about the social times, what was going on, the sign of the times in those days.
Sure, like any school in the 1960s or late 60s, there was a lot of concern. I mean, the idea of being drafted was front and center for certainly all the men and a lot of the women in that era. The Maryville campus, like a lot of campus situations, was more an idea of free thinking and anti-war sentiment during that time in an area that was very much a Republican-leaning pro-Nixon, pro-war kind of area. So I remember very distinctly the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and just we really weren't sure, what to do or what this meant for the country. We did, I think, have some sense that all the events of 1968 and 69, 1970 with Kent State, that was a significant time in the history of this country. And I think in many ways changed the course of how the country thinks about the use of the military and the lives of the people involved.
Yeah. Well, Michael, a lot of times people like me, at least, we feel like things are changing really fast today. And it's scary for me. Got 3 kids, and I wonder, what's going to happen in this world. Is it the same type of feeling it was in the late 60s? Is it the same type of unknown, or is it different? Is a different feel than it was then?
I think it's similar to what it is now in the sense that there was a lot of frustration about events and a lot of sense of disconnectedness that I guess I see that now in much the same way that many of us of college age felt in the late 1960s.
Yeah. And what a time. I was 2 years old in 1968, living in Alameda. My dad was in an Oakland Army base. When I see videos, everything looks so peaceful and beautiful out there. And there was so much going on in the world. So you graduate from Maryville. What do you do? What do you do next?
I actually pretty much sat out a year as the draft board decided whether they were going to take me or not. And then I worked for a year as an assistant coach at Field L. Collinsville High School, where Noble Marshall was the head coach. And then I had the opportunity to coach Drewry Mason, which was coming off a Final Four appearance in the state. And like I was saying earlier, this was really the first time that Drewry Mason had, I think we had 6 African-American kids and 6 white kids on the team. And it presented its own set of challenges beyond the fact that I was a 23-year-old head coach, not a whole lot older than the players themselves. So,
wow. Was it a difficult transition to coaching black kids, or I guess maybe coaching any kids?
I don't think so. I wouldn't try to say that there weren't challenges, but I think that the coaching, you coach players, and the thing I always look for in players, and maybe this was influence from Husky and the Martinsville program. I always looked for players who really wanted to play, maybe not as talented as some of the other players, but if you weren't really committed to playing, it was a little bit of a challenge. One of the things Bill Russell said was that attitude is a talent, and at any program, having kids who, you hear Dick Vitale and others talk about this now, is how you have to really be committed to the program and committed to the team if you're going to be successful.
Yeah. Well, Michael, how did Husky treat you as a rival? Were you guys in the same classifications? And did you guys get along as fellow head coaches?
Yes, we did. And Husky helped me a lot. After I got the Drewry Mason job, he was one of my first phone calls, and he spent a lot of time with me and helping. Of course, they called him Husky because he wasn't. He was rail thin his whole
he was. Yeah.
adult life. but this was during the time when Martinsville made their brief foray into the largest classification, up to 1A at that time. And so we didn't actually face them on the district level. We still played them home and home. Well, sort of home and home. Drewry Mason had a very small gym, and the Martinsville game was always a big draw. And so when our home game was actually played across the county at Laurel Park High School, because they knew that the gate would be much bigger, and that was necessary to support some of the athletic programs there at Drewry Mason. So we went for the big gate and sacrificed our home court.
Yeah. Laurel Park was, I think, home to Odell Hodge, I believe, right?
Odell Hodge, yes.
Yeah,
couple years after I was going up to Charlottesville.
Yeah. So other than the race element, were the kids at Drewry Mason similar to the kids at Martinsville?
Yeah, I would say yes. The proximity was, it was whether you went to one or the other, it was pretty much where they drew the line. I would point out that Jeff Adkins, who played at Martinsville
and coached
at Martinsville, Jeff Adkins' older brother, Steve, had been one of my students at Fieldale Collinsville. He was, the family actually lived out in the county, but my understanding was they either moved into the city or paid tuition for Jeff to come into the city and play for Husky.
Were those the best Martinsville teams you ever saw, the ones that Jeff Atkins played on? Because they had Tony Dallas, they had Sean Moore, they had so many great players.
They did, and they might have been. It's hard to compare teams from different eras, but I will tell you this: there's still people in Martinsville that think in the state semifinals in 1979, the refs swallowed the whistle on the final play because they wanted Ralph Sampson in the finals the next day.
Yeah, I've heard that story over the years. I think I may have been at the tournament because my sister was there playing for Robinson, but I don't think I saw that game. I think we went home and came back for the final. Man, I wish I could have seen that.
I'd been on a business trip. I got back in 1979 for the state final when Ralph's team won the state championship. But the game the night before, there's still a lot of revisionist thought in Martinsville about the outcome of that game.
Yeah, it's hard to feel sorry for Martinsville. How many championships you guys have won?
15.
15. It's just it's incredible. Well, you ended up going to UVA. That must have been an amazing experience. What years were you there, and what was it like working with Terry Holland and I guess Craig Littlepage, or I forgot who was working with him at the time, but what were those years like?
Oh, well, that was a great time. I had the opportunity to serve on the staff with Terry and Mike Schuler and Bill Cofield the first year. Bill would this was the 1975-76 season. So this was the season that Virginia, we went to Landover as the sixth seed, and we win the tournament. We beat Carolina 67-62 in the final. I don't remember many basketball scores, but I remember that one.
Yeah.
And then we went to Charlotte for the first ever appearance of Virginia in the NCAAs.
That's the first one, huh? Wow.
Virginia had been to the NIT a couple years before and lost in the first round. But this was their first NCAA appearance. And I think we were up 5 or 6 at the half. And in the second half, this was Ray Meyer's DePaul team we were playing. And they, in the second half, I think it was Ron Norwood from DePaul. It was one of those moments or one of those games where he's making every shot he takes. And you kind of knew that unless you got the ball out of his hand, that he was going to have a big impact on the outcome of that game. So we lost that. It's difficult, I think, to coming off the ACC win to be able to get up and bring the same type of intensity the following week. But that was really a great win for the program, and in a lot of ways paved the way for Jeff Lamp and Lee Raker, and that paves the way for Ralph. So quite the moment. And in the championship game, followers of Virginia basketball will remember Kihei Clark's great pass to Mamadi Diakite in the regional finals against Purdue in 2019. And that is generally considered the greatest assist in the history of Virginia basketball. I have the second greatest anyway, in the pass that Billy Langlow threw to Otis Fulton. What happened was one of the Carolina players, right before the half, they had scored to cut it to 2. And one of the Carolina players, I believe it was Bruce Buckley, reached across the end line as we were inbounding the ball, only like 2 seconds left in the half. And by touching the ball, it was a technical foul. So Wally hits the free throw, and we get the ball at midcourt. And Bill Langlow throws this incredible pass to Otis Fulton. He threads the needle between Mitch Kupchak and Tommy Lagarde, and Otis Fulton catches it right at the rim. Of course, he couldn't dunk that year.
That's right.
But Otis drops it in, so we pick up 3 points there and go into halftime with a 5-point lead and the momentum. We played them even in the second half, so yeah, you better cut me off because I'll talk all day about that one.
Yeah. I've interviewed Wally, and I've interviewed Castellan, Stephen, and I've interviewed
Castellan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I've interviewed Bobby Stokes. And I could relive that season over and over again. It's just a great memory. And, they had to win 3 games in 3 nights. They don't have tournaments like that anymore. Now you have double buys. And NC State had an incredible run last year, but that run was unbelievable what UVA was able to accomplish. And I think Bobby Stokes hit a whole bunch of free throws. And, Otis had that shot before halftime. Is that the one you were talking about that was famous?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. There's just so much about that game. And then, logistically, they played far away from, the hotel was far away from Capitol Center. I remember they both told me. I don't know why that was so relevant.
We were up the BWI Parkway. I think the name was the First Colony Motel. It's a cryptographic museum now. You still pass it on the BWI Parkway, or the Baltimore Washington Parkway. But yeah, a lot of people said, "Why are you staying so far away?"
Yeah.
The following year, I think this was something Terry liked to do, to get a little bit removed from the venue. The following year, with the tournament in Greensboro, we stayed over in Winston-Salem, and 20 miles or so. And of course, that year we beat Wake Forest in the first round, and Clemson in the second round, and we're back in the finals again for a second straight year in 1977. So we're playing our third game in 3 days, and Carolina is our opponent in the final again, and they were playing their second game in 2 days because it was only a 7-team conference at the time.
That's right.
Furthermore, Walter Davis had been hurt the night before and only played limited minutes in the semifinal. And Walter Davis was, didn't play at all in the final until I think the final TV timeout. And I remember we were still ahead and in a position to win in the 77 championship game. And at I think the 4 and under TV timeout, Dean gets Walter Davis up off the bench, and you could see the energy pulsating off this guy. And I knew we were in trouble.
Wow.
And he had a big impact on those final minutes. And of course, Carolina went on to Atlanta and the national championship game that year. And
That was Butch
we,
Lee.
we, we
They lost
I'm
to
sorry.
Butch Lee and Marquette, right? Is that the year they lost?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. And so we were just that close to beating the team that would go on to the national championship game. So
Yeah, that was such a golden age of basketball. It was amazing. I played for Bob McKeag. So you missed McKeag by a year or two.
oh yeah, yeah, Bob.
Yeah, he was at Robinson in Fairfax. He took his team to the state final in '87. Great coach, great guy. I've interviewed him. He's a really funny guy. I don't know how well you know him, but he's a real clown. What did you think about Charlottesville? Did you enjoy living there?
I did. Of course, when you're in graduate school, you you don't have a lot of money to enjoy the finer side of the town, but it was a great experience, and I will always be indebted to the basketball staff and Gene Corrigan too as athletic director. It was a great time in my life, and I that was the last that I coached. I went into the business world after that. And part of the reason was the all the people that we worked with, the other coaches, the players, everyone was just so wonderful. I had a hard time imagining going anywhere else. The other thing that was a real pleasure uh, at Virginia was getting to know some of the assistant coaches, and Mike Schuler, who would go on to be NBA Coach of the Year, I think, in 1986.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Mike Schuler remains the best X's and O guy I have ever encountered in basketball. Mike Schuler could see stuff happening on the basketball court that nobody else saw, and he knew what to do about it. He was a brilliant tactician, which is probably why he was such a success in the NBA.
yeah. Well, Michael, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other shout out I'd want to give was Bill Cofield, who after the '76 year went up to Wisconsin and was there for a couple of years. He had some health problems and passed away way too young. And Craig Littlepage. We had first met Craig at a tournament at South Carolina the previous year. He was an assistant at Yale, who was also in the tournament. So we'd gotten to know Craig, and as soon as Bill left, I think Craig Littlepage was the first and only person that Terry called to fill that vacancy.
Yeah.
And of course, Craig went on to a lot of success at Penn as head coach and a lot of success as the athletic director at Virginia.
Yeah, so I was at the Hall of Fame induction last year. He's in the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame now.
Mhm.
I was really surprised how emotional he got. I mean, he was so emotional, it was uncomfortable. Not because you don't want to see people cry, but it's sometimes it's just hard to know how to handle that moment when you feel for someone and they're really breaking down. It was a very emotional speech. It's online on YouTube if you ever want to see it. It was a great speech. I was surprised how important it was to him. I was touched, and it made you realize that's why he was so successful, because he cared so much. Hey, look, I know, it looks like the years have been kind to you. I know you told me you're in Lake Anna now. When you look back, could you have been a high school football coach? I'm sorry, high school basketball coach and a teacher in Martinsville or wherever? If you would have looked back on your life and you would have been a small town coach and you would have had success because you were off to a great start with what you were doing. You won an ACC championship and you won a district championship at Drewry Mason. But do you think you would have been just as fulfilled if you would have spent your life with basketball and teaching?
It's hard to tell. Actually, my twin sister, Lynn, spent her career she and her husband spent their careers at Denison University in Ohio, and did quite well, and all that. What's hard to imagine is all the people that I know that I met over the last 40 some years since I left coaching, and all the experiences that I've had in the business world and with those friends. It's hard for me to imagine my life without it. Now, I suppose in some parallel universe, I was the head coach at Murray State for 15 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly very glad, very fortunate to have had the experiences I did, starting in high school and going through my time at the University of Virginia. And I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.
Yeah, you witnessed a lot of history, a lot of American history happened in that like 15-year span of your life. And that's just so fascinating that you're able to witness it and participate and you had success yourself. When you think about basketball these days, do you like where the game of basketball is? I know college is going through some turmoil. I wouldn't say turmoil, but going through some change and some revolution, I guess, with the money and the transfer portals and all that's going on. In the NBA game, with the game has gotten all 3-pointers and analytics, so it's not the battle for space that it used to be in the 80s, where it was a mano, who wants it more. Do you still follow basketball, and where do you think the game is these days?
Actually, last night I did catch a little bit of the Cleveland Cavaliers with Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunter playing quite well. They're having a good year. I have a couple thoughts about the state of college basketball. I hear a lot of criticism of the players, and I can't blame the players for this. It is not the players who evolved a system that pays the football coach at Ohio State $10 million a year. This is a system this is a business that's just awash in money, and the center really couldn't hold on that. The people who really are responsible for the product, the players, there was too much money for them not to be cut in on it.
Yeah.
The whole NIL concept is kind of awkward and needs evolution. But I think that'll happen. The other thing, as far as player movement, I think what gets overlooked is that we're just coming out of the COVID era, and everyone got an extra year of eligibility for COVID. So immediately you had 25% more players in the system that they didn't raise the scholarship limit. And so, players had to move. Players probably got pushed out of a lot of places. And it's one of the reasons that Maryville, a couple years ago, ended up with both a Division II and a Division I transfer. It's like water finds its own level. With the excess of players in the system, I think that made a lot of or forced a lot of players to move around in order to find minutes. Thankfully, we're through that now, and so I think that will help stabilize. And I think NIL will probably evolve to a point where you have a year commitments again. Of course, the athletic scholarships have never been multi-year commitments. So
it's just fascinating, and unlike pro sports where you have salary caps, you got rules about agents, you have all these rules that have evolved ever since like Kurt Flood or whatever. Piece by piece, the rules have been kind of put into place, and they change every year. But there's rules. We haven't really had time to catch up and implement any rules. You got states, you got in high school, different counties are different. It's crazy. I did want to ask.
I think there will. One final thought on that.
Sure.
It may take 5 years or 8 years, but I think it will lead to a realignment and possibly a fourth division. Much as you had the disparities that I experienced when I was at Maryville, where we had like 2 scholarships, and everybody we were playing against had like 12. So I think that what is going to evolve out of this is kind of like in football, you got a 1 and a 1A in college football. I don't see where schools like Lafayette and Bucknell and Dartmouth, even Longwood or Radford, I don't see where those schools are going to be able to have the money to compete with the Alabamas and the North Carolinas and Dukes that have just so much more money than the other schools. So I think maybe somewhere down the road there is some form of realignment coming in that area.
Yeah, I think the European model for all sports, but particularly soccer, where you just put teams in divisions based on how good they are, and then they're grouped regionally, and then when they get to the highest league, they're in one league. But I don't think this conference thing. We have a lot of history involved. I mean, you love the ACC. We get emotional talking about 1976 and what it means to us, but I'm not sure it's going to work anymore. I think you're going to have it based on success and maybe regional, but you can't have these conferences where you have the Pac-10 and you got teams on the West Coast. I mean, on the East Coast. The whole thing is not making a whole lot of sense.
Well, speaking from my experiences coming from a 6 seed to win the ACC, it's sad this year to see that there's some teams that don't even make it. And
they don't even make they don't even make the conference tournament. Is that what you're saying?
Don't make the conference tournament. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very unfortunate that the integrity, well, not the integrity, that's too strong a word, but the structure of college basketball was sacrificed on the altar of big money for football. Yeah, and that's what really led to the conference realignments. And there was something about having an 18 conference where you could, even the last place finisher in the league had a shot. I think it's really, now we have tournaments that last 6 or 7 days, and it's just it's different. And what happened with conference realignment that was all for football. It really had a negative impact, I think, on the basketball side of it.
Yeah, that has permeated through to high school. Like there's a district up here in Northern Virginia where they get double buys in the district tournament. I mean, I'm like, you guys watch too much TV. So what's happened is it's the team that wins the district, they're already qualified for regionals, and they're going to play. They can often play teams already played 2 games before they get to them, and it's on their home court. So, and then all the way through the state, if you look at the districts and regionals, so many games are on home courts. Even the state semifinals the other day were at home sites. You're not giving the visitors a chance these days. So it's all chalk. It's all the top seeds everywhere in the high school tournament this year. So, they really need some grown-ups and people to understand competition, to take a hard look at these things. I know money's important, but they're losing it, or we're losing our what made these competitions so special. We're losing it. It's okay that a 1 seed has to play an 8 seed and they may lose everything. Back in 73, 74, as you know, when Maryland lost to NC State, they didn't even go to the NCAAs. I mean, but we still talk about that game because of how much it meant. Nowadays, no one remembers 4 years ago if someone got upset in the district tournament because it doesn't mean it. They don't really mean anything. So, in the aggregate they do, but one game doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, you mentioned that 1974 final. I remember watching that, and I remember earlier that day, my brother and I had been in University Hall watching Petersburg with Moses Malone,
West Springfield,
against West Springfield and David Kester's. And in the end, it's David out of the corner with a jump shot that would have sent it to overtime.
That's right.
And just like that, my brother and I are sprinting out of University Hall. and we'd strategically parked the car because we knew if we didn't get ahead of the traffic, we were going to miss the start
Yeah.
of the Maryland State final, which of course, is remembered as, possibly many people would call it the greatest ACC final ever. I would call 76 the greatest.
I'm on your side on that. I don't even think it's close. I've interviewed Dave Kessler because he's a Northern Virginia legend. Great player, one of these underrated players. I had a great interview with him. I think he probably would enjoy it. And he lives close to Bridgeport or Virginia's, right there on the border of Tennessee and Virginia, and he's lived there, all his adult life, and he's doing well. He's a great guy, very humble
Good
guy, but he's a legend. I did want to end with, and I've really enjoyed this, Michael. You're amazing gentleman. They have so much knowledge. I could do this all day, but I want to ask you about Martinsville today. You touched on the fact that they've lost industry, which has happened throughout the country. These vibrant small towns and small cities have lost their industrial base, their job base, or whatever. What's Martinsville like today? Is it still hanging in there, or is there reasons for hope about towns like Martinsville?
Well, I hope so. Martinsville was a prosperous town and had, good housing stock and good infrastructure. I am hopeful that as we advance in the 21st century, Martinsville is able to attract more of the type of good jobs like my dad had with the DuPont company when I was growing up. And, with good roads leading in and out and all the type of infrastructure that you need. The last of the Barrows family left Martinsville in 1988, so I haven't been back there a whole lot. But I do, I wish them well as far as economic development. And of course, a lot of that is going to be dependent on the education. And I hope that the downward spiral can be reversed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that it's been so long. This might be a silly question, but do you have a lot of pride that you're from Martinsville? Do you look back on those days fondly? Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of people, particularly here in the Old Dominion, are familiar with Martinsville's excellence in basketball, and being part of that has really meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Well, look, Michael, this has been wonderful. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I think we got so much great material, so many great memories. Let's definitely keep in touch. You're on the Facebook groups, but at some point maybe we can get on and talk about. I know there are so many things you probably wanted to get to that you've talked about before that I didn't even know that you could talk to. But I would love to do this again at some point. But I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Julian, and look forward to the next conversation.
That's great, Michael. Have a great day, and best of luck there in Lake Anna.
Okay.